Stitching this ZZ plant is really easy. It's super quick. It is not complicated. And you know, I love a nice, interesting, complicated stitch with a really cool effect as much as anybody, but sometimes it is nice to just have something that is straightforward, simple, stitches up quickly, and you see the results of what you're stitching right away. And that's what this is. And you know, kind of like the plant itself, this is a plant that you can't kill, which is why I have it at my house because I used to be a plant killer. I am managing to keep plants alive now, so I'm patting myself on the back for that. But anyway, this one is just really fun. So I'm starting with the leaves, and it's just a satin stitch at, I mean, the stitches themselves are parallel, but the direction of those stitches is at an angle headed down towards the bottom end of the leaf. So I'm using 2 strands. The color chart will tell you where to put each color of green, and it doesn't matter if you start at the bottom of the leaf or at the top of the leaf. I've filled these in both ways. Some of them have the same color on both sides, some of them have 2 different colors. So for instance, here I'm going to start at the top of the leaf, and I just make sure that I come down far enough and that I come up outside the pattern, the line on the pattern, to cover that up completely. Totally did that wrong. Totally wrong angle right there. That is an example of talking while I'm stitching and not thinking about what I'm doing. So let me cut that out and re-knot my thread right here. Okay, let's just rewind. You can start at either end. I'm going to start at the top. So here I'm going to start right at the tip of the leaf since I'm starting at the top, and I'm going to go down. That stitch is almost a straight stitch, but now I'm going to start coming outside the pattern line and very slowly make my angles more pronounced as I go down. These leaves are small, so they don't take a lot of time. I just want to maybe, again, if this happens, not the end of the world, but I try to make the angle pretty sharp on each leaf as opposed to having, let me see if I can draw it on here. So for instance, this leaf right here that I haven't stitched yet, I try to make the angle a pretty sharp angle for every stitch. I try not to make the angle like this. See how it's almost just horizontal across? I really want it to look like an actual leaf with this, you know, these very simple stitches. So I make a really sharp angle all the way up the side of the leaf. So that's all I'm doing here. So this one, like I said, I started at the top. Just come down in the center, and I don't even have to put a center vein because where these stitches meet in the center of the leaf will just sort of automatically read like a center vein. It's like a little visual textural vein instead. You could put a little line of stitching if you wanted to, like a straight line. That would be fine if you wanted to. And maybe one more stitch here. Whoops, sorry, didn't mean to knock the camera. All right, so that one is one that I started at the top and worked down. I'm gonna just hop right over here, and let's say I wanted to start at the bottom of a leaf. So I'm gonna make sure I come up far enough on the side of the leaf. Again, I don't wanna come up like right here, because then that angle would be really shallow. So I come up almost halfway up the side of the leaf and come all the way down, and now just stitch up towards the tip of the leaf. And I know I've said it before, but I'm really coming up with my needle, not a lot of distance, but definitely so it's obviously outside the pattern line, because when I pull this stitch that way, it pulls the fabric over, and if I come up right on the pattern line, sometimes that pattern line will show. I already talked about that being the erasable friction, but regardless whether I'm doing something that I know will wash away or go away with heat or a permanent line, I always try to cover those pattern line. So that's how to do the leaves of the ZZ plant. The stems of this plant are created using the whipped backstitch. I'm using 2 strands, and if you did the kaleidoscope stitch along with me, you know that we used a lot of whipped backstitch, and it's a great stitch for lines, and I especially like it for a stem because it's a it's not like a little, I mean, it has, I won't say it has a lot of dimensionality to it. It's not a 3D stitch at all, but it's a nice smooth line for a stem like this. Very simple to do. Whoops, maybe a knot in the end would help. Thought I had one in there. All right, let's start over. We're going to do, the name is very descriptive because we are going to do a backstitch all the way down this stem. We'll take just a second to do that. Backstitch is very simple, but sometimes it has a tendency to look like a little bit of a dashed line or a zigzag line because unless you're just super precise with it, it's, you know, it's one of the most basic stitches out there supposedly, but honestly it is, I don't find it to be this, it's simple, but it's hard to get it to look really, really straight sometimes. So that's why the whipped back stitch is excellent. Now I'm gonna stop right here, and these little leaves have a little tiny stem on them. So while I'm right there, I'm just gonna pop up there. This is not gonna be whipped or anything. I'm just making a little line, but I'm just right there, so I might as well do it while I'm here. All right, so now I'm gonna just hop back down here and finish up my back stitching. Trying to be straight with it, but like I said, back stitch is one that is deceptively a little bit trickier than you think it would be. Got one more to go. All right, now I can start the whipped part. So I'm going to come up at the end of the back stitching. Now I'm just going to put the needle under the first stitch and go around. And now just a whip stitch is just going around and around and around. It's almost like just spiraling around that back stitch. And doing this really smooths out that kind of jagged, dashed line effect that we don't really want. Gives it a little bit more bulk. Main thing is just try not to catch other, like in other words, right here, I don't want to catch those stitches of the leaf, so I'm pushing up from the back a little bit so my needle is sort of angled above the fabric, and I had a little back stitch right there. And so now here is the last back stitch. All right, all I got to do now is just take that needle down, and there is my stem. I think you can see how it gave it a really, like almost like a little rounded, you know, like a stem, like a round stem looks, okay? It's very simple, very effective, so that's a great stitch for stems. Stitching the string of pearls plant is really so simple. You can probably even just look at this and figure out what I've done here. It's not that complicated. For the stems, I did the whipped back stitch, and for the little beads, I'll call them the little balls, that's the string of pearls. They're not leaves, I don't know what they are, but anyway, the little balls are French knots. Now, the string of pearls is a really cool plant, but it's a succulent, I believe, and I do not have the ability to keep succulents alive. Even though they're supposed to be so simple to care for, I managed to kill them. So since I can't, I feel like I would kill one immediately, I had a lot of fun stitching one. I think that's the only way I can have one at the moment. So anyway, and even though it's very uncomplicated, like I said, stems and then French knots on top. I decided to make it a little more complicated than just that. And I did that by mixing up the colors of the threads. So let me just basically say each color uses 2 strands. There's 3, colors kind of, a dark, a medium, and a light. 2 strands for each. And then there's 2 sizes of berries. So there's large berries and small berries. In general, I kind of randomly put the larger berries closer to the top, and the small ones mixed in more towards the bottom. But it's not like there's a line like all of these from here and below are small, and they're all mixed up. Also, I kind of went rogue here, and I think I'm putting way more berries than there are on the pattern. So don't let that confuse you. I marked the dots that are on the pattern, but I have ended up putting more berries. So that's fine. You can do as many as on the pattern, or you can do more. I started with the darkest color, and to make that, I combined the 2 darkest colors of green. I can't remember the numbers at the moment, but they're written in the instructions. So I just combined the 2 darkest colors, and I'm doing the dark berries first, very random. I do fewer dark berries than any others because in general, this plant has it's a little bit lighter, but I did want for some to look like they were in the shadows, so they're like further back. And you'll notice that I just stitched right on top of the satin stitching and the outline for the G. Just stitch right over that. And I'm doing the same thing with the French knots. So because these are up here towards the top, I'm wrapping these twice. Sometimes I bring the needle up on one side of the stem, and when I take it down, I go down on the other side, so it's like right on top of the stem. Sometimes I do the berries right next to the stem. So those are the big ones, the dark ones. Put a few here and there. Like I said, don't do too many dark because you really want to have more medium ones and honestly more light ones of anything. And I'll put just a few small ones down here at the bottom, but not very many. Maybe one right there. Only wrapping those once. All right, let me put that one aside. And now let me go grab the medium color. This is a combination of the 2, not the bright green, but the medium green and then the next lighter green. So that's what this one is. And honestly, this is not complicated to mix these colors, and I don't even know if it makes that big of a difference. It adds a little bit of visual interest, but it's not like it's this massively, like you can really tell what's going on here. If you don't want to even bother with mixing the colors, that's fine. Just, make 2 strands of the darkest green, 2 strands of a medium green, and 2 strands of the brightest green, and just use those and it'll be fine. But I'm doing the same thing. I'm doing some just random, putting some larger ones up here at the top, kind of close together. And I really do, like I said, I want more of the medium green. And it's not like you can't put small ones at the top. In fact, you actually can. It's fine. So I'll put a small berry. Just wrap it once. I'll put some of those up here. So as you can see, it's very random. large one there. Very, very random. All right, let me go finish with the medium green. And I went ahead and just stitched all of the lightest colored berries. And for that one, I just used 2 of the same color, and that's 2 of the, not of the bright, bright green, not the same green that I used for the stems. I tried that. I tried all different combinations for the light green, and finally I just decided that it worked, it was fine to just use 2 identical strands of that next lightest green. But otherwise, that is all there is to this string of pearls. And hopefully, even though I'm a succulent killer, hopefully this one will stay alive. To stitch these Calathea leaves, we are going to use satin stitching and sort of needle painting. And I say sort of needle painting because it's not like official needle painting. You know, sometimes with needle painting it's very not precise exactly, but I mean, really all it is, we're just going to use a couple of techniques with needle painting, and I'll explain that more when we get there. So if you've never done needle painting, don't worry. It's just like filling in with a bunch of stitches is kind of the simplistic definition of it. But let's get started. And to do that, we are going to basically satin stitch. We're going to work from the outside edge towards the center. You could start in the center if you want. I don't think it's really going to make a big, huge difference, but I started on the outside. And like we did for the satin stitching up here, we are going to put a line of split back stitch right along the pattern line. And I am using 2 strands. And I'm using 2 strands because I kind of want the edge of this leaf to be built up a little bit. It'll be a little bit thicker for the rest of or most of the other colors, not the center vein, but the other greens and the ecru. I'm going to use 1 strand, but I just wanted the edge of this leaf to be a little bit raised up. Tiny bit of 3-dimensionality, not a lot. So right on the edge here. All right, let me finish that. Now that stitching is done, I was going to point out that I started stitching on this end and I worked my way to the tip of the leaf, because now I'm going to do the satin stitching starting here and working back towards this end. And this is another one of those places that it just doesn't really matter. If you want to start your satin stitching here, then, I mean, this way I'm here and now I can just start stitching. I don't have to run a bunch of thread on the back. Really just a little thing. Again, I just don't think it matters which side you start on. I just tend to start at the tip. And for the rest of these stitches, I want to think about the angle. The angle I want is going, so here's the center vein of this leaf. And generally I want the angles to run from here. This one's almost out of ink, but I don't want to do it. This one's going to disappear pretty quickly. I don't want to confuse all these lines putting more. But every angle for each of these sections is going to run from here, like towards the tip, down at an angle, just like any other leaf you would do. You know, it starts here and angles that way. So I know that's a lot of lines there, kind of a little bit confusing, but like I said, that's an air-soluble marker, so it will disappear here in just a minute, probably before I finish. And so I am coming up on the outside of the split back stitch, just like I always do. And on the inside here, can you see these? Let me see if I can just put more lines on here. So you see these sort of scallops that run like this. I am not trying to have a perfectly smooth line where that is. I'm just not. And this is where it's a little bit like needle painting. With needle painting, I'm not going to go into a whole, detailed description of how to needle paint, but with needle painting, you you go down, you take the needle down inside a little bit and you have staggered edges and you go down inside the next section of color. That's kind of what I'm doing, but it is not that precise. Just be precise on this outside edge, but just this whole line, I kind of try to follow it. It really is going to help me here on the next step when I do the ecru color. So you just don't have to be super precious with this. Just put these satin stitches in, kind of keeping in mind that those angles, a little bit of a staggered edge, make sure your stitches are close together just like any other satin stitching, and that's all there is. Oh, I kind of went a little too far over, so I'm going to put another stitch right there. Okay, all right, so finish all that satin stitching. And now I'm going to switch to one strand. This is the ecru. And here's the part that is sort of kind of needle painting. If I was, let's say I was satin stitching each of these shapes, these weird wiggly shapes, I would work really hard to make sure that my needle came up right along the edge of this shape that I've stitched. I'm not going to try to do that. I'm going to be okay with coming up inside where I've already stitched and make the edges where they come up and the edges where they go down staggered ends. I'm not trying to have a nice clean, I'm not trying to perfectly make this perfectly smooth scalloped thing. I just want a very sort of striped, striated, you know, you can see what I'm talking about over here where it's already stitched. And you're stitching with one strand, so at first you may be thinking this takes forever. And so you do have to kind of just keep working at it until you think you've built up enough color. But the reason that I mentioned that I kind of tried to sort of follow that scalloped shape is so that I kind of know where, if you look at a real Calathea leaf, the light color, this ecru part has like points on it, like scallops and points like this, like that. So that's what I'm trying to mimic here. And I don't really want all of these edges, like I mentioned before, to be in a perfect line. I want them to be all kind of staggered. But so like here's one of those points. So I'm going to put in several stitches that really make that look, make that really stand out. I can work back and forth. I don't have to go all the way across, and these are not parallel, I mean necessarily parallel lines. Sometimes I come up in the stitching. Sometimes the stitches like these, I'm going to make them really tiny. Oh, that one's a little too tiny. So that it kind of reads as a, some places it's a really narrow little section of ecru, like in here. I think I need a little bit more over here, and this part's going to be more pointed. So I know it's a little bit vague, but really just stitch this ecru scalloped jagged line until it's thick enough. Really, I know that's not very exact, but it may take you just a little bit longer. Like I said, we're working with, I could have used 2 strands, but I really wanted more control over how delicate this line was. So that's all there is to this. Just keep filling in, and because it's 1 strand, you can put a good number of stitches in here and they don't build up too much. So it won't look too thick, I don't think. For the next section, we're just going to do really the exact same thing with 1 strand of the dark green and kind of come up inside the ecru stitches you just made and fill that next section. And don't be afraid to, so I don't know if you can see that line, that's the line right there for what's going to be the light green, to really bring your stitches, pretty far into that next section. It's not like you have to stay within the lines of the section you're working on. Go ahead and take your stitches down into the area that's going to be the next color, because that's what will give you the color blending. That is needle painting. I think one of the most common mistakes people make is not taking the color that you're working on, not carrying those stitches far enough into the next area. Because if you stitch right up to the line that delineates, one area from another, that's just satin stitching, just, going right up to the edge and stopping. Go ahead and take those stitches all the way down. Don't be afraid to come up inside your ecru stitching, although you don't want to just completely obliterate it. And keep up with your angles. That's the dark green. And then to finish up this side of the leaf, we're going to do the exact same thing with the brightest color of green. Just fill it in till it's as solid as you want it to be. Come up a little bit inside the dark green. Follow that angle and just do the exact same thing. And then to give this leaf just a little pop of color, we're going to make the center vein with 2 strands of the darker pink color and a split back stitch. Just follow that line right down the center. And let me see, let me get down there. I stop it. I don't take it all the way past the tip of the leaf. I stop the stitching. I'm going to stop it about right. Just see where it looks good. Because it doesn't really extend beyond the tip of the leaf. Maybe one tiny, tiny stitch right there. Okay?